Focus. Ideate. Innovate. Enable. KPMG presents The Blueprint. Business in the New Normal.
Hello and welcome to KPMG Presents The Blueprint Business in the New Normal in association with CNBC-TV18. I'm your host Gautam Srinivasan, and the theme for our leadership conversation today is Aspiring to Ascend Vision 2047 Key Policy and Tax Enablers to the Make in India and Make for World initiative. Our panel features Nitin Bakshi, Vice President of Global Supply Chain for India, Middle East and Africa, South America and Pacific at energy major Schneider Electric, Sujoy Ghosh, Vice President and Country MD India at solar manufacturing powerhouse First Solar, and Abhishek Jain, Partner and National Head for Indirect Tax at KPMG in India, for joining in this talk and looking forward to mapping out with all of you the blueprint for India to realize its manufacturing ambitions. Let's first get a sense of the story so far. So I'll start with you, Nitin, and Sujoy and Abhishek. I'll come to you for your views on this question, on your assessment of India's transformation in the past few years in achieving the end goal of positioning itself as a manufacturing hub. In order to achieve India's transformational objectives for 2047, what according to you should be the key enablers? Because when I look at the opportunity, there's a clean energy transition opportunity which could be around 300 to 400 billion dollars in itself for India. And when you look at low carbon footprint manufacturing, that itself is also seen as a sort of a key driver. So let's get everyone's views on this. Nitin, we'll start with you first.
I think to achieve India's vision of 2047, in my opinion, we have to really look for urbanization a lot, right? I mean, in the last few years, we really have come up to a standard of urbanization. But I think, to my understanding, at least we should have 50% urbanization done in the country. And very largely towards economic growth, it should have a basic infrastructure available, right? Which means a good quality of housing available to the people, reliable power, and that's what the energy transition is all about. Good connectivity of the people, connectivity of the goods, products, and also at the same time the data, which is super important right now, and that is where the data center comes into the picture. Good water supply and sewage systems, right, which is about the infrastructure development. Good education, right, which is also superly important, and above all is the health services. So to me, summing up, it would be more about technology, social, economic, and environmental, which is super important to envisage the India's vision of 2047, which to me is urbanization.
Sujoy, maybe we can get your thoughts on this, the key transformation enablers for India to achieve its goal when it comes to the 2047 target.
From an enabling standpoint, very clear visibility to demand, long-term visibility to demand for solar and wind, and all of the technologies which come into the clean energy space is there. Underlying policies and regulations, given that the sector is pretty highly regulated, is also has been put from, let's say, 2020, 2021 onwards, right? When for the first time, India connected its, energy decarbonization efforts to industrial manufacturing policy. And now I think, what we will wait and what we will see happening play out in the next 4 to 5 years is the building of the local supply chain for, solar and wind and green hydrogen, which are the three pillars of the decarbonization initiatives which are underway.
Absolutely. And it's that value chain which is going to be key in terms of the resilience that India would like to present itself when it comes to that manufacturing story. And it is in this context, I'll bring in Abhishek for his thoughts on this, considering when we talk about that low carbon footprint manufacturing, and a lot of companies, a lot of enterprises, a lot of countries around the world trying to be net zero, that's where a lot of the manufacturing opportunity is also going to present itself. So a lot of enablers have been presented. Abhishek, your thoughts, your assessment, first of all, of where things stand currently and where we are headed as we look towards that 2047 mark.
So I think India's current stand is very clear. It is to make in India and also make for the world. That's clearly India's motto currently. I think some of the key enablers that should work in India achieving this objective, first, of course, are all the fiscal incentives, which is the production linked incentive schemes rolled out by the government for specific sectors, the incentives offered by the state governments under the state industrial policy, lower income tax rate for manufacturing setups. So that's on the fiscal incentives. That's pillar number one. I think pillar number two is the regulatory changes for and licensing requirement for certain product categories to be imported in India. Also, quality standards that India wants for certain, again, category of imports and higher import tariffs, right? So this is the second pillar, which is basically reduction in imports and making imports more prohibitive or more expensive. This will also help more and more companies to come and set up manufacturing facilities in India. The third, I think, is very important, which is skilled workforce and infrastructure development for having a good manufacturing base. And the fourth, as I also mentioned, is automatic tailwind, which is a result of COVID and geopolitical related supply chain diversification. So I think these are the four pillars which will really help India having a fastened growth on the manufacturing side.
Nitin, your thoughts on the best practices or policies of other countries like, say, the United States or Japan or China, whereby India can, where it can foster domestic manufacturing for India, that India can learn from and, of course, grow from their own?
Very interesting question, honestly. I mean, I would say this question should be on a reverse trend, right? What other countries can learn from India? Honestly, I mean, that's the way I look at it. Having said and done, I think India has learned a lot in the previous years. There are certain policies which are very very relevant for other countries to learn from India. In India, when we talk about a product made in India, right, or make in India, is much more preferred in all the government tenders. This is what is a very great learning, and this is what is going to promote a lot in terms of investments in these countries. Now, of course, India is further ahead, and I would say it's a benchmark for other countries, honestly speaking. While I see the investment, what we are doing across the world, India is among the top of the list, which is giving us so much of impetuous on investing in India, be it talking about a PLI scheme, capital subsidy, labor subsidy, power subsidy. You talk about anything, both from the state governments, which are competing each other, which is very, very important. And that's something which is not very prevalent in other countries, right? You see, US is a very big country. You have different states in those countries. I have not seen those different states competing with each other, right? While in India, you talk about any different state, they compete with each other. They invite you. While, why don't you come to my state, right? I will give you this, and the other state says no. Well, I would like to give you this if other state is giving that, right? So that's something which other countries, in my opinion, like Japan or US, should learn, right? And I would say India tops the chart in making sure the policies are well defined. And I would really appreciate the government in the initiatives on all those subsidies or attractions which they have put forward to really boost the manufacturing in India, and other countries can learn from it.
It's great to hear a large energy major saying that India is the innovation incubator when it comes to the manufacturing space, and hopefully the world gets to see the Indian example and see what can be done. Because if it works in India, it can work anywhere. So, Joy, let me get your thoughts on this. Nitin and Schneider Electric, they're very bullish in terms of their investments in India. I want to get the first solar perspective as a large solar manufacturing powerhouse. Your thoughts on how conducive is the environment for investors now under this Make in India initiative?
For us, when the government announced, a slew of measures which Abhishek spoke about, from lowering the corporate tax rate for new manufacturing to then essentially creating the PLI scheme as an incentive to localize in conjunction with certain barriers on imports, basically to levelize the playing field. All of these factors combined for us to evaluate India as a destination for manufacturing, and we invested close to 5,500 crores over the last 2 years. What's worked for us, besides all of these factors which my co-panelists said, is two things, right? One, the states have actually walked their talk on the ease of doing business. The whole permitting process has moved online. All of the 35 to 38 different pre-construction permits and the pre-operative permits which are required for us. We got all of our pre-construction permit in about 35 to 40 days, and the pre-operatives in 2 months, right? So that's a dramatic change from, let's say, 5 years ago. The second thing is the quality of infrastructure and logistics has gone up. It's not really up to where it should be, but there's been a significant improvement in availability and quality of power, water, and connectivity, especially in certain states like the one which we are in, like Tamil Nadu. And you combine that with the talent which is available, the cost of construction in India for large industrial buildings, and factor all of this in. India presents a pretty competitive cost structure as compared to ASEAN economies, or indefinitely as compared to the Western economies, right? And then what makes that combination even better is that there is a scale available in terms of the demand in the local market. And so when you combine these two factors, it makes a pretty compelling argument to invest in India for high volume manufacturing.
All right, on that note, we'll take a very short break here on KPMG Presents The Blueprint Business in the New Normal in association with CNBC TV 18. Stay tuned, we'll be right back.
KPMG presents The Blueprint, Business in the New Normal. KPMG presents The Blueprint, Business in the New Normal.
Welcome back to KPMG Presents The Blueprint Business in the New Normal in association with CNBC TV 18. Let's dive right back into the conversation. All right, Abhishek, let's get the bird's eye view perspective from you in response to what Nitin and Sujoy have said, because they've talked about the supply side. I want to get your view on the demand side as well. When we look at the PLI scheme, I want to focus on that. A scheme is as good as its implementation. So I want to know from you, do you think such schemes have been successful in attracting investments in the country, and whether they have been suitably implemented, allowing the applicants to receive the promised incentives? Your thoughts on this?
No, I think these schemes have been fairly successful over the last couple of years. Uh, and it's a comparatively newer scheme as compared to some others that the earlier government had, like special economic zones and all. I think these production linked incentive schemes are sector focused. And for some of the sectors, as I think Sujoy also indicated, you need to minimize the differential that exists as compared to manufacturing in India versus manufacturing in any other country. And the government has an all round approach in terms of, as I mentioned, increasing some of the import barriers, increasing customs duty on imports, and on the twin hand, giving incentives if you were to manufacture in India. Some of the new age sectors, like Sujoy also mentioned, on the solar panels and now semiconductors, advanced chemistry cells. These are sectors where India did not have any significant amount of manufacturing. All were localized. All manufacturing was happening in countries like China and some other countries. To attract investment in these sectors in India, I think this production linked incentive schemes, I think, has done a fairly decent job. And we have seen, in fact, a lot of investments in the last, till March 23, we've seen about 65,000 crore being invested in the sectors where PLI has been issued. And not only this direct investment, it creates a lot of ecosystem around where a lot of other component suppliers and raw material suppliers, that ecosystem will also develop. Having said that, in some of the schemes, we've seen concerns in terms of the minimum threshold investment requirement being very high, or the value addition that's required in India, again, being on the higher side, or the product coverage needing a correction. But I think the good part is that the government has very proactively engaged with the industry players to make these PLI schemes a success. And they've come out with iterations and clarifications. And in some cases, with a PLI 2.0, like what we saw in solar to get more investments, we have seen that in many other sectors as well, where the government is coming out with a PLI 2.0 to get investments and correcting maybe some of the inefficiencies that were there in the original scheme.
All right. I now want to take this conversation in the direction of global value chains in the context of the China plus one strategy. So Nitin, let me come to you for that. As I mentioned, China has been the pioneer when it comes to manufacturing in past decades, but COVID-19 that led to a global shift, and industries have started looking into an alternative. So in that context, in your view, which country is benefiting the most from this realignment of global supply chains, and how do you think India can capitalize on such an opportunity and, of course, be part of the global industry's China plus one strategy?
Post the COVID, I think India has really benefited from it, right? I must say, because two reasons. One is, of course, the COVID, and other the geopolitical issues which went on between US and China. And in our sector as well, we have seen that we had a huge setup for China, for exports as well as for their own local consumption. But the market itself earlier on was quite extensive, and that means the capacities were quite sufficient enough to capture that market. But now I think with all these issues of COVID-19, regionalization, and also at the same time geopolitical issues, the countries which have benefited, of course, is India, right? I mean, for obvious reason, and also certain Eastern Asian countries like we talk about Vietnam, right? Or as a matter of fact, some Philippines, for example, are also further benefited as well. But among all, if I were to look at uh, what is more important is we should have a people skill, right, which is very much available in India. And you talk about any Asian countries, we are among the best skilled people availability in India. You talk about the resources, we are abundance of resources available in India, so it's obviously a big benefit for India. Now, there was some disadvantages earlier. One was the ease of doing business, which was not very prevalent in India. But now, over a period of years, with all the policies coming in, ease of doing business is very much easy to do, I must say, right? Approachability to the government, approachability to the officials, right? I would say a corruption going away fully, being more digitized, right, which has really helped a lot in India, right? So to me, all these, and plus, of course, with all the schemes coming in, including all PLIs, the capital subsidy, all other related schemes or incentives given by the government, everything is in the favor of India being the favored destination for C+1 strategy. And we also have deployed that in Schneider as well, where we don't say that we are moving out of China. What we are saying is China is sufficient enough for their own market, right? So it's China for China, and then anything outside China would be India being a manufacturing destination for not just for India, but India for exports as well.
All right, Abhishek, quickly, your viewpoints on, from global competition, let's look at local competition, what we were discussing, state governments competing against each other to attract investments. Your thoughts on this fact that, state governments are actively attracting value chains through lucrative industrial policies or sector specific policies. So in your view, which states have been successful in attracting big industry players in the state, and what is the reason behind that? A quick view from you, Abhishek.
As you rightly mentioned, and we discussed about the central PLIs, I mean, these are promoted by the central government, applicable uniformly across the country, and they are publicized, and industry are well aware of these. But in many cases, we have seen that industry players miss out on the state incentives that are given by the states under their own industrial policies, right? And these benefits are unique to each state. It depends on the quantum of investment. In some states, it's a state GST that is refunded back, whereas in some cases, it's a capital subsidy or a turnover based subsidy, right? In some state, there are sector focused policies that are there, and the benefit that you can get on in each of these different states could be different. If your investment threshold is above a particular limit, you can in fact get tailor made incentives from some of these state governments. So this is something that industry we have seen at times misses out. And as a combination of state incentives and central PLI incentives, you can get even 80 to 100% back of your invested amount back as incentives from both the central and the state government. So it's very, very important to factor these. They completely change the 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 decision to invest in India. If companies have to decide between India and some other countries, it completely changes the return on investment. In fact, a union territory like Jammu and Kashmir, they in fact give you up to 300%. So if you've invested $100, you can get back up to $300. So it's very important to analyze these benefits and factor the appropriate state in which you need to put up your investment to maximize your returns and make India even more competitive in the manufacturing space.
All right, we're almost out of time. So, Sujay, let me come to you for the last word and the last question in this conversation. And it is in the context of, that it's been seen that in order to promote local manufacturing, the government either increases the import duties on key products or imposes the requirement of import licenses, like we recently saw for laptops. Thank God that's gone for now. Do you think such drastic steps are detrimental to the interest of the users of such products, especially when such products are either not available indigenously or if available, they're inferior to the products available globally? Your thoughts on this? Is it time to really throw out that old mindset of taking all these drastic steps to, in a sense, guide the market?
I don't think so. I think it's time we took drastic steps, especially in the context of our industry where China has a monopoly over, the value chain. And post COVID, and given the the social and environmental scrutiny on clean technology value chain which we are seeing, there is a need and space for alternate value chains to be created, and those cannot be created unless governments take drastic measures recognizing the long-term strategic importance of creating those value chains. In terms of the quality of products being manufactured outside of, let's say, China, in the US, or in India, I don't, the quality is at par. Uh, and I think the issue is that, yes, there's going to be a period where the transition from an import dependent industry to relying on the domestic value chain, that period is, in the case of solar industry or any large industry like ours, would be typically about 5 to 7 years. And in those 5 to 7 years, you need that ring fencing, especially if there's a monopolistic economy which is at play. And once you get your local ecosystem up and running, especially around components, like when you go into a solar module, you look at glass, you look at aluminum, you look at all the other components which go into the module, and the PLI kind of drives you to localize that value chain, but it takes time. Once the local component ecosystem is built, then there's no reason for that product not to be competitive on a global scale. And we've seen this play out in sectors which have walked that journey, like automobiles. And I think it's going to play out in all of these sectors where the government's kind of focused on bringing local manufacturing. We have to give this time, and it'll happen.
All right, think big during this transition period for a better manufacturing future. That's the message coming out of our panel. On that note, though, it's time to conclude this conversation on our special presentation titled KPMG Presents The Blueprint: Business in the New Normal, in association with CNBC TV18. I'd like to thank all of our leaders for joining us on this talk around aspiring to ascend Vision 2047, key policy and tax enablers to the Make in India and Make for World initiative. And of course, thank you to our viewers for tuning in. Till next time, this is your host, Gautam Srinivasan, signing off. Have a great day.
KPMG presents The Blueprint, Business in the New Normal. Focus, ideate, innovate, enable.